Hi everyone, Kyle with Andrew Hilton here, and we have something a little bit special for you for Father's Day. Coming up Friday, June the 18th at 6 o'clock, we're presenting malt whiskeys from around the world, and I'll be honest, we had a couple that really pushed me to this one. So we're going to do Ireland, Japan, Scotland, obviously, and then Canada. So we're going to be talking about how malt whiskey varies in different countries around the world and how they each put their own unique stamp on it. I did say this was one of the whiskeys that was the impetus for it. This is by Waterford Distillery. They have these lovely blue bottles, and we've sold them for a few months now, and I've always thought they were better than most, but not unbelievable, not exceptional. And then Gaia came out, the new organic expression, and it is without exception the best Irish whiskey I've ever had, and by quite a wide margin. Then we go to Japan with Togouchi. This is their 9-year blended whiskey. They actually are aging this in like a disused railway tunnel. Really, really interesting story. They're not a distillery, they're a buyer and a blender. Next up, speaking of Signatory, we have their Glen Elgin. This is a whiskey that has a bit of a fun story. This came in about November for us. We only got 6 bottles because we weren't sure, and you know, it was something I'd never tasted before. This sold out almost as fast as the Lagavulin Nick Offerman edition. It sold out in like 2 hours. It was just gone. It's an absolutely fantastic expression of Glen Elgin. Not a distillery we see very often. It's owned by Diageo. But the Diageo bottling doesn't come here, or if it does, it's terrible and I don't care. This is really wonderful, and it's just what a great whiskey to put up against the best the rest of the world can do. And then finally, from Calgary of all bloody places, Burwood just released their very first single malt whiskey into the market. We got 12 bottles of it. They call it the Scientist. I gotta say, I got a sample bottle of this not too long ago. This rips. Hello, everyone. Welcome to nice jump cut, Aaron. Let's open with that. Nice work. Welcome to our Father's Day single malt whiskey extravaganza. We have 4 whiskeys for you tonight, and you'll notice for the first time with one of our spirits tastings, we actually don't have the tasting order written on the bottles, and that's for 2 reasons. 1, I didn't think of doing it before we actually bottled them, but for 2, it's been a bit of a controversial one. We could put any of these whiskeys at certain points in the order. I don't think the Burwood could be last. I don't think that the Waterford could be first. But if you wanted to move this into the 3rd spot, if you wanted to move this into the 3rd, like these can move around a little bit. It's not an exact science. But I wanted to explore kind of single malt from 4 different countries, 3.5 really. And we're going to talk a little bit about whiskey from all of those regions. And we're going to start right here at home. We're going to start with the Burwood, the Scientist single malt at 53.2%. So this is a cask strength whiskey. Burwood Distillery is based in Calgary. They were founded in 2017 by 2 brothers, Ivan and Marco Chilik, as well as Jordan Ramey, who is their head distilling PhD wonder kid that actually makes all of the whiskey. That's actually him on the front of the bottle there. That's Jordan Ramey. Now, this is a limited run for this of 500 bottles. They've already sold out at the distillery. The website's completely closed out. They actually were doing a lottery to get bottles in Calgary, but we just got a dozen bottles to sell, and we decided to put it on our whiskey tasting because it sounded like fun. Let's jump into a little bit about what single malt whiskey is versus isn't, because we're going to talk a little bit about that when we get to the blended, but I just want to be very clear. Scotch has to come from Scotland, just like champagne has to come from France, just like bourbon, at least at this point, has to come from the United States. Single malt whiskey, however, can be made anywhere. It has to be from 100% malted barley, it has to come off 1 set of stills, and it has to be uncut with grain whiskey. It can't be adulterated, and it almost always has to be at least 3 years old. I believe this is like 3 years and 2 months or something. It's a very, very young whiskey, but we'll get into that as we go. So this one coming from Calgary, made at 53.2. And right out of the glass, there's that big cereal grain. Now again, it's made with 100% malted barley, but is anybody getting like that really rye cinnamon dill character right off the initial nose? And there's no rye to this. This is a single malt whiskey. but there's sweetness, there's baking spices here. Like I do get cinnamon, I get clove. I get something in the dried baking ginger rather than fresh ginger family. And then I get fruit. I get oranges. I get kind of that green neutral fruit that you could say is apples or pears, or some people say it's lemon. But I like how big and rich this is, and I don't get any perceptible peat to this, so I'm doubting there's much peat to it at all, if any. But it kind of reminds me a little bit of, say, Auchentoshan or like Glen, which these are whiskeys that don't have a lot of peat to them. They're not really salty. They're very landlocked distilleries, and they create these big cereal grain expressions in the mid-mouth, and they become very weighty, rich whiskeys as time passes. Now the dill, and Kevin picks that out as well, dill is so specific to rye that even though this is 100% malted barley, I'm wondering if they are perhaps aging it in old rye barrels, and that's where it's picking up the actual rye character. And also Craig jumped in with something else that I really wanted to get into here. There's no new make character. We have some very, very young whiskeys here. You know, this is up at a 13, sure, and this is a 9, but both of these are like 3 years old. And we know exactly how old the Waterford is. We'll dig into that in a little bit. But new make character is what the whiskey, or at that point it's just new make spirit, smells like. The clear spirit coming out of the distill into the spirit safe and being, you know, run off to be put into barrels. It has a really particular smell, kind of like a hot tin can, kind of like hot copper. I also get like a burning iron. Like, have you ever like taken an angle grinder to like iron? It has that kind of burnt metal smell to it, and it has like a really particular corny, sweet, hot cornflake sort of character to it as well. It's very, very distinctive. I really can't put a name on it. If you ever, like, now that COVID's kind of lifting and you want to go visit some of the, I think there's like 6 or 8 distilleries now in Calgary, and just stand in a still room and take a deep breath, that smell, that sweet vegetal metallic smell, is what I call new make smell. A lot of people do. That's something that I don't get on any of these whiskeys, and I think that's a wonderful thing, because that smell to me is immediately like, nope, I don't like this. I don't want to drink this. I don't want this near me. Just, nope, this can go away. Talk to me in 3 more years when this whiskey's actually mature. The fact that this doesn't have that is absolutely remarkable to me. And yeah, it's an interesting one. Talking to Andrew Gray, this is going back to when Jim McEwen, Andrew Gray, and Mark Renier bought Bruichladdich for 6 million British pounds back in 2000, 2001, and restarted the distillery. We started getting Andrew Gray over here about every year, every other year for the better part of a decade. And the one thing that if you got enough whiskey into Andrew, he always went off on was like, why aren't you making single malt here? You've got incredible barley. You got some of the best barley in the world. You've got this Rocky Mountain water. You've got all of these things that are absolutely perfect for making whiskey. Why aren't you doing it here? Well, now there are distilleries that are doing it here, and the quality is turning out absolutely spectacular. And, you know, Canada's got a few distilleries that are doing this. I know that Last Best is starting to get into the whiskey game. Of course, they've got the Rupert's Canadian Rye, but I know they're also doing single malt. You've got Shelter Point. You've got the Glen Breton folks out east. You've got Graham McAloney out on Vancouver Island doing his project. You've got single malt whiskey popping up all over Western and even Eastern Canada, and it's just such an exploding industry. Ooh, juniper. Yeah, they bought it for 6 million British pounds and then immediately turned around and sold it to Remy Cointreau, I think in 2014, for 58 million. So tidy little turnaround there. And we also got 1 million liters of whiskey with the purchase, which is just insanity to me. Now, I want you to remember Mark Renier, one of the founders of Bruichladdich, the guy who got the $6 million steal on Bruichladdich Distillery and turned around and sold it for an absolute fortune. Remember that name, and remember him buying a brewery on the cheap. That's going to come up later. I'm looking for that juniper, and I'm not picking it up. I'd maybe go into, like, cedar, but I don't know if I'd go juniper on this. And I do see where you're leaning in, Kevin, with it being kind of bourbony. And I would actually say on that, it's not anything to do with the spirit that's coming out of the stills. To make this whiskey this drinkable this young, they're probably having to use a really, really high percentage of either brand new ex-bourbon casks, brand new ex-rye casks, or just brand new virgin oak casks, which is ludicrously expensive. But just like bourbon, that's the process for bourbon, is they were using brand new, never before used casks. And so the big note in bourbon is that big oak sweetness, that huge oak influence, which we won't get on these so much. I think that's what you're getting on this. And I think that character will get dialed back as the whiskey gets older, because you can't age something in virgin oak for 12 years. It'll taste like just wood and nothing else. It'll taste like woody pancake syrup. You do need, you know, a little more restrained use of oak if you're going to make something a little older. Now, I said we're kind of doing whiskey from 3.5 countries. So this is our Japanese blended whiskey of malt and grain. So this is by, you know, they use the brand name Togouchi, but it's actually by the Chugoku Jozo Distillery. Now these folks have been around making distilled alcohol for supplying the sake industry since about 1918. In 1963, they actually started becoming a sake brewery, and when they did that, they actually started making imo shochu, which, if you want to think of it as like sake turned into grappa or sake turned into vodka, you're not too far off. And then they decided, when the Japanese whiskey industry started blowing up in the 80s and 90s, they decided they were going to get into the whiskey business. But they didn't know how to make whiskey, so they don't. There's absolutely no Japanese whiskey in the Togouchi whatsoever. Now, I said it was a blend of malt and grain. Its malt whiskey comes from Scotland. Its grain whiskey comes from Canada. So let's jump into that and see how that goes. I am going to recommend rinsing or swapping glasses between each whiskey, because these are so different from each other. And it is such a subtle whiskey sometimes that you do want to rinse. Now, there's not a lot of information. I looked high and low online, and I couldn't get a phone call back from David and Herman & Son to find out what the actual whiskeys are that go into this. Now, it says it's getting malt whiskey, but it's probably a variety of different malts. And it says it's getting grain whiskey from Canada. I'm guessing that's probably all the same grain whiskey. But I couldn't find out where they come from. I couldn't find out which malt whiskey distilleries in Scotland are supplying the malt whiskey. I couldn't find anything talking about the Canadian whiskey distillery. I saw a little bit of speculation in some online forums about who are they probably buying it from, but I wasn't really convinced by any of it. Some of them were saying, oh, well, you know, this distillery is, you know, the main bulk supplier for malt whiskey to everybody, which was Glen, which is owned by Bowmore Suntory. So, you know, there's the Japanese connection with the Suntory ownership and D, but that's just pure speculation. What's the malt whiskey? Don't know. What's the grain whiskey? Don't know. But they are, however, taking it to Japan, aging it in Japan, and how they age it's actually fascinating. Very close to the distillery in the city of Hiroshima, there's actually a railway tunnel that was kind of built as a tunnel to nowhere. So they were expanding the Hiroshima subway system in the early 1970s, and by the time they actually built this tunnel, it was completely redundant. It had no purpose to exist, so they finished the tunnel and were like, we don't actually have any reason to run trains through this. There's literally no point for this tunnel to exist. So it sat abandoned until Togouchi actually took out a lease on this tunnel, and they use it to age whiskey now because the temperature and the humidity in this old train tunnel are apparently perfect for not only aging whiskey, but also aging their imo shochu. Now, one thing that I'm getting on this, that I'm curious if anyone else is I find Japanese whiskey has a really particular note to it that's indescribable. It's almost like a perfumey, brandy-ish character, but that doesn't even come close to nailing it down. Now, considering there's no Japanese whiskey in this, it's Canadian and Scots, where's that Japanese character coming from? Now, I don't actually know, but I'm going to venture a guess here. And remember I said that they don't distill whiskey, but they do distill their own imo shochu. And that's aged in barrels, as is sake, depending on exactly what you're getting. I would guess that they're repurposing some old Imo shochu barrels or even sake barrels, and as a result, it's picking up that rice spirit, that rice wine character, that certain Japanese note that's really hard to nail down. And it makes it a Japanese whiskey, even though it's not distilled in Japan. It's aged there, it's bottled there, it's cut 40% alcohol there, but I think it's a little tiny bit of cross aging with the shochu that's actually giving this its particular character. I get really pretty like yellow fruit on this. I get pineapples and mangoes and lemons in the nose. I do get that particular like earthy, funky koji note from the you know, the shochu barrels, I'm assuming. It's kind of a funky character. I get some real spice in this. I think this is more of a fresh ginger character than it is the dried baking ginger with the Burwood. And then in the mouth, yeah, Craig nails it with grassy. This is all like fresh straw, green apple. This is a very like happy daily character whiskey. Like this is something that I could sit down and just have anytime because it's grassy and it's soft and it's pretty, and it does have that funky character that's, I think, coming from the koji notes out of either sake or shochu that's making the whiskey just taste a little bit different. So I really like that. Ooh, somebody says rooibos. I'll be honest, I'm not the greatest at tea. I'm really bad at tea. There's something in here, maybe like a lime character. There's something in here I'm really struggling to nail down. It's like lime and marshmallow, but it's neither of those things at the same time. Does a really particular spun sugar, like candy floss sort of sweetness to the nose. Yeah, and I'm just not enough of a tea person. Maybe I should be to get my tasting notes on teas right. I know about Earl Grey and green, and that's about as far as my tea knowledge goes. So I'm just, I don't know, I'm just coffee all the time. I drink tea when I'm sick, and that's about it. Or when we're just generally out of coffee and I need something with caffeine that's hot. Then I'll drink tea. But yeah, that's fascinating. And, you know, I find Japanese whiskey, I had an opportunity to taste a true to authentic Suntory product with a private tasting group a few weeks back. I did an online tasting for that group. And it had that same, like, intangible Japanese character to it. And I should point out that there are some Japanese whiskeys that are distilled from rice. Fukucho whiskey, which is a fantastic whiskey, is actually 100% distilled from rice and then aged in oak. And it has a very different character to other Japanese whiskeys. But yeah, that certain Japanese character still shines through despite none of the whiskey being distilled in Japan. And I find that really interesting. And that's why I wanted to talk about this one in particular. We're through 2 whiskeys in 15 minutes. Good Lord.
Wife's birthday.
It is my wife's birthday. That's true. And we are, Aaron's actually letting me get out of here without doing any teardown or anything. He's going to take a key and let me out early. So
Yeah.
I'm not deliberately rushing for that, but that is why I'm drinking less. I'm going to take her out for dinner.
That's nice. Where are you going?
I don't know.
Oh.
It's her birthday. She gets to pick. So,
Okay.
you know. Really put that cap on. Okay, so fun story on this little Glen Elgin. This is our only independent bottling on the table, and I want to talk a little bit about independent bottling versus something else. The Togouchi we're just going to set to one side because it's different. With the Burwood here, it's distilled by Burwood, it's aged at Burwood, it's packaged and marketed and sold by Burwood. It's Burwood all the way down. With the Waterford, it's the same thing. It's owned by the Waterford Distillery. It's made there. It's aged there. It's packaged, sold. It's absolutely amazing website. All of that is done at Waterford. With independent bottlings, and this is true of Gordon MacPhail, the old Murray McDavid line when it existed, Signatory, Cooper's Choice, First Editions, Old Malt Cask, all of them. Someone steps in at some point and says, no, we're going to do it a little bit differently. So let's talk a little bit about Glen Elgin here. Glen Elgin is owned by Diageo, which is I think now called Breakthrough Beverage, but same difference. It's so let's say this was done like the Burwood. It would be distilled at Glen Elgin. It would be aged probably at Glen Elgin, but maybe at one of their other bonded warehouse facilities, because they have a lot of them. They own 27 distilleries, so they have more than a few warehouses. It would be bottled by them, and then it would be marketed, packaged, sold, everything like that, all in-house. And they do one. They call it the Flora and Fauna series. It's a Glen Elgin at 12 years old. It's got a picture of a stoat on it or something, and it's like a 43% bottling, and it's the only one they do. Okay, cool, but Breakthrough's, you know, the people who bring in Captain Morgan and Smirnoff and Tanqueray and Bailey's and Guinness. It's a huge company, but for whatever reason, they've decided Glen Elgin, not for North America. We're not selling it here. So, okay, what if you want Glen Elgin? Well, in this case, a gentleman named Andrew Symington, who owns Editor Distillery, he basically went up to the folks at Diageo and said, hey, Glen Elgin, you're not selling that in North America. Why don't you guys be good sports and sell me 10 barrels of Glen Elgin? And they said, okay, sure, it'll be this much money. So he took his barrels back to his own distillery and his own warehouses, and he aged them himself. He chose what age he's going to release it at. I believe in this case it's a 13-year. We didn't put it on the bottle, and it's not on the tube. And I don't know where an empty bottle is. We're going to pretend it's a 13-year, because actually, no, I can check. I can check. I was right. So in this case, he's released it as a 13-year. He's done it at 46% alcohol, and he's done it out of a ex-bourbon cask. Now, that really does open up the possibility of, okay, well, if according to the manufacturer, there's only one Glen Elgin. It's a 12-year in the Flora and Fauna series at 43%. What if Burwood only ever decides to do The Scientist? I mean, that would be stupid. They're going to release this as a 10-year and a 12-year and all sorts of things in special editions, obviously. But Diageo doesn't do that. You know, like Lagavulin for a very long time, when the Classic 6 came out in 1988, with Lagavulin as a 16 and Dalwhinnie as a 15, Glenkinchie as a 12, and Cragganmore as or Craigellachie as a 12, or whatever. They really never changed. They had the Distillers editions a few years later, I want to say 93 or 94, but especially with Dalwhinnie, they never did anything else. There was the 15 and the Distillers edition, and it stayed that way for 30 years. And then, you know, they came out with the Game of Thrones Dalwhinnie, and it was the first Dalwhinnie that was different. It wasn't even a very good Dalwhinnie. It was like, oh, thank God. This Dalwhinnie, it sucks, but at least it's a new Dalwhinnie. Thank heavens, this is so bad. This is the problem with big control, big distillery control, is they don't do a lot of interesting things because it's easy to be lazy. Independent bottlers will bring distilleries to market that don't normally come here. They'll try innovative things. They'll do different stuff. And it's kind of a fun way to play with whiskey. I have some people who are like, I hate independent bottlers. Give me distillery bottlings only. A couple of our like bigger whiskey buyers who buy like for their collections are that way. Most people are just like, I want a great whiskey for a great price. And that's usually where independent bottlers shine. Okay. Let's talk about the whiskey in our glasses in front of us. We brought this in October. We brought in a dozen bottles. A customer came in, bought a bottle for himself, said, oh, hey, would you guys like to try a little bit? And we said, sure, we'll try a little bit. And he opened it and he poured it for us. We all tried it and we said, holy shit, that's good. And then within about 3 hours, I'd sent some text messages out to people saying, you need this, and it was gone in an afternoon. All 12 bottles were just gone in about 3.5, 4 hours, just gone. So I ordered a whole bunch more, but it showed up in February, which is not exactly whiskey season prime time. So we've been sitting on it a little bit. It's ripping good. Glen Elgin was founded in 1898 for a cost of, I think, 13,000 British pounds at that point. It was so successful that in 1901, just to get the thing off their hands, they turned around and resold it for 4,000 pounds. In 2 years, 3 years, they took a 9,000 British pound loss at the end of the 19th century, or sorry, yeah, end of the 19th century, start of the 20th century. They took just a 9,000 pound loss just to get it off their hands because it was so unsuccessful. It eventually ended up in Diageo's hands, like I said. It's been forever and ever a huge component of the White Horse blend, which isn't a huge deal in North America, but it's one of the 2 biggest blended whiskeys in Western Europe. It's huge in France, huge in Spain, sold in Germany. It's also very, very big in Latin America. And that's kind of where Glen Elgin's really shone as a component of that blend. Now, this really rules. And I want to point out a couple of things here. Is anybody getting like toffee and butterscotch and heavy, fudgy, sweet, desserty notes? Tape delay is not my friend, but I'm going to assume that some people said yes. Craig does. He gets honey and vanilla, in which case, close enough, that's going to be a good enough segue. Aaron, can we go to my first image, please?
Sure can.
Let me know when that's on screen.
We want the worm cast?
Yep, that's what we want.
Okay, you're up to bat.
Perfect. All right, so I'm hoping you're all looking at the same picture I'm looking at. What you're looking at right there is the side of the Glen Elgin Distillery, and what you're looking at specifically are what's called worm tubs. Now, when the whiskey is distilled, it starts out in this big copper pot. It gets boiled the living hell out of it. It comes up out of the pot as a big steaming vapor that's superheated. It's definitely not something that's, suitable to drink. It's wildly dangerous, but you have to cool that down, have to let it rectify so that the actual whiskey has, a liquid form rather than a vaporous one. When you do it just by using a line arm, you tend to get a very light, very clean, very fruity whiskey because you have very, very low sulfur compound content. When you run it through a worm tub, and what you're actually looking at there is basically a giant barrel of water with a big coil of copper tubing running through it. It's a very, very old technology, and they are notoriously unreliable because if they spring a leak, how would you know? It's sitting in a bucket of water. They'll actually test the alcoholic strength of the water pretty regularly, and that's how they'll tell there's actually a leak in the system. But what worm tubs do is they maintain a fairly high sulfur content in the final spirit. And that sounds really bad. And when it comes out of the still, it stinks. But when that actually gets into the barrel, it reacts with the wood in a very particular way. And that's where you get those heavy, toffee, caramelly, fudgy notes, is using a heavy worm tub condenser. It gives you the sulfur to give you the fudgy notes, and I think that's absolutely fascinating. I went way down a rabbit hole on worm tubs today, and I've really enjoyed my time doing that. Yeah, Macintosh is toffee. And yeah, this is absolutely ripping good. We'll talk a little bit about some of the other stuff here. I mean, it is independent bottling. I don't think anything here, maybe the Togouchi. This is just a poem in French and then in Japanese. It's not a desperately inspiring poem, mind, but they don't talk about whether it's, it's caramel added or chill filtered. Again, there's really nothing about this distillery. If you go to the website, it's exclusively in Japanese. It's really, really hard to get any information on this whiskey. I would guess that it is based on the color, but I can't really say one way or the other. But anyway, with this, no chill filtration, no caramel addition, very bright, very clean, very true to form. It's not something where you're really going to be, you shouldn't be trying to drink around the mistakes that were made at bottling. It's as pure and clean as you can get it. And it's an absolutely magnificent whiskey for that. No to toffee. No to toffee in general, or no, you don't get toffee, because both are, the wrong position, but, I like toffee in whiskey. I think it's lovely. Yeah, and then the spiciness comes through. Like, yes, we're talking about all the sweet notes, but we're ignoring kind of the other highlights of this. It's peppery and it's sagey and it's kind of rosemary-ish. Whereas this kind of smelled like the baking cupboard. This smells like the fresh herbs in the crisper drawer. Like, this is all of your fresh, green, spicy plants. I don't say there's something in kind of that sweet thyme floral character, because there's definitely a floral component to this Glen Elgin. And that's kind of why I like it. Like, it's got some of those toffee-ish things deep down, but if you just want to, you know, appreciate the green, planty, pretty thyme, rosemary things, it's got all of that happening too, and I really like that about it. So that's very neat. And yeah, this does have, like, for a 46% whiskey, considering we have some, like, cask strength stuff on the table, this does have some real staying power, even for 46, even for only a 13-year-old. This lingers, and I like that about it. I will say the longer it lingers, the more I get like a limestone soapy sort of thing, which I like, but I can understand that's a bit of a turnoff for some people with whiskey. Absolutely. But I'll also say that if you leave it long enough, that kind of switches to like a sweet marjoram, sweet oregano herbalness as it kind of really gets down there. I haven't had a sip of this for about 30 seconds, I'd say, and it's now getting back to kind of like an herbal character. Yeah, and like a dried oregano, not fresh. And there's always some power suggestion. Like, that's definitely something that's true. I mean, I knew about the toffee because I did the research with Glen Elgin, and I understood how, you know, important worm tubs were to their production. And that's why I went looking for it. But I also know Glen Elgin because we've had, in the 21 years I've been here, we've probably had 15, 18 different independent versions of Glen Elgin. And when I think of Glen Elgin, I think, okay, it's going to be spicy, it's going to be light and airy, and it's going to have, like, if it's a really good one, it's either going to be grassy or herbal. It's going to have that green note to it. Inexpensive examples, Glen Elgin very often will have a lot of like apple, lemon, pear, even to some underripe fruit like rhubarb. It can show that way. Those tend to be less good examples. I'm thinking of a Provenance Glen Elgin from about 6-8 years ago in particular, which just, it tasted like inexpensive single malt, and I can't really pick out another taste. Pepper, maybe. Like, it was a really boring whiskey. Independent bottlers, I know I kind of talked up Signatory here. I think they're an excellent bottler, but I would say that they're not magic. They don't make, you know, universally amazing whiskey. Signatory actually has a line below this. This is called the non-chill filtered collection, or unchill filtered collection. They have a line below this that I refuse to have in the store. This line is generally very, very good. You'll get the occasional dog, 1 in 5 years when you buy a lot of Signatory. Something at Silverton will be, yeah, I'll just put it on sale. But it's rare. The line below this, the 43%, I call them the shotgun shell line because they have a copper base and then a different colored top depending on what part of Scotland they come from. They're a crapshoot. It's 50-50 whether it's going to be great or it's going to be terrible. I've had some amazing whiskeys in that line, but I'm really glad it was someone else that was buying them, because this is one of those whiskeys where I buy it off an Excel spreadsheet. I just get a list of what's available, no tasting notes, no samples, no nothing. You can go digging around online, but online reviews are at best unreliable, and you're just buying off a list. So sometimes very tricky. Yes, we definitely had some trouble nailing down the tasting notes with this Waterford. This is actually our 3rd bottle of the Waterford because none of us have been able to stay out of it. It's been very, very popular, let's say. Speaking of popular, our beer tastings are popular. Let's talk about what we have coming up for a beer tasting, shall we? First off, big news, no wine tasting next week. As we did last summer, if you remember, as it got hotter, you know, tasting attendance kind of started tailing off a little bit, and it has this summer too. I want to keep this interesting, and I want to keep it kind of an event that people will show up to and want to attend, so we're going to cut it back by half. We'll play it by ear in fall when we come back to weekly if we do. But yeah, we're going to go to bi-weekly, so it will be twice a month, 1 wine, 1 spirits. At this point, at least, the beer tasting is still doing well enough that we're going to keep that weekly. But again, if sales really slow down, we have no idea. Like, this is really day to day, week to week for us because, you know, places are opening up again and we don't know what it's going to look like. So as of today, beer tastings remain weekly. Wine and spirits tastings are moving to bi-weekly. But we do have a beer tasting to talk about. And I don't know. I think it's a fun tasting. It's mostly dry hopped sours. And then we have something really different for you. So, few things here. 1, we have a Superflux on the table. That's always exciting. 2, we have our first Steamworks beer, which I can't believe. Steamworks is such a foundational brewery in Western Canada. How has it taken us like well over a year to get to a Steamworks beer? 3, Last Best, who I talked about as a distillery. They are, of course, primarily a brewery, or were a brewery first at least. They have a brand new mango dry hop sour called Mangalomaniac. I actually had a pint of this at Owl last night, and it was really ripping good. So I'm looking forward to tasting that with everybody. And then finally, I love beets. I love beets a lot. And when Town Square Brewing announced they were doing a beet sour, I just buy this every time it's released. It's not always available, but it's available enough. I really, really like the Beets by Sinden. I think it's fun. Is it stupid? Yes. It's something I'd buy all the time? God, no. But it's really fun and it's really good. And I think it does deserve a run out just because it's just silly. Let's have a look here. Ooh, shortbread dunked in... Okay, that's actually such a good tasting that I'll have a little bit more of this, because that's so specific and so ludicrous that I actually will pour a little bit more here. Beet beer is best beer. Okay, you know what? Creme anglaise, I didn't get the dairy thing, but if you wanted to say that was kind of like clotted cream or almost something a bit yogurty, I'd be right with you. And I wouldn't say like... It's like those dried yogurt raisins that I absolutely can't stand. You know, the ones that like they were a big thing when we were kids.
I love those.
You love those?
Oh, God.
God, they're so bad.
Oh,
That's
so
disgusting.
good. Delightful.
So join us next week when Aaron's fired. No, that's got a real dairy thing that I didn't notice until Sean picked that out. Shortbread, I think most scotches have at least kind of a shortbready thing. But yeah, that's really neat with the dairy character. Okay, the Waterford. Now, let's loop back to what I was talking about with Mark Renier, ex of Bruichladdich. He bought Bruichladdich for £6 million because Jim Beam Group didn't want it, didn't know what to do with it. They were stuck with this distillery they couldn't use. Well, Mark Renier, after he sold the Bruichladdich distillery a few years ago, he didn't retire. He just went to Ireland and he pulled exactly the same trick again. So Waterford Distillery is not a brand new building. It's an old Guinness brewery. It's a generous pour there, Aaron. That is a mighty generous pour there, Aaron.
Oh, I should have done that.
This is an old Guinness brewery. Then in the very early 2000s, Diageo, who owns Guinness, of course, spent £42 million renovating this brewery to bring it up to code and everything else. By 2014, it was surplus. He bought this thing for £4.5 million. He did it again. And he spent a few million more turning a brewery into a distillery. And that's where we have the Waterford Distillery. So Mark Renier literally pulled the same trick again. Different ownership group here. There's no Ender Gray. There's no Jim McEwen. Jim McEwen, of course, is off at Ardnahoe on Isla doing his own thing. But let's talk a little about Waterford. So founded in 2016 by Mark Renier. These guys are all about the provenance of their barley. Now, if you know a little bit about Bruichladdich and their focus on barleys, let me just step aside here for a second. These are, distilled still during Mark Renier's tenure there. And what do we have? We have beer barley, a heritage strain, and we have organic barley. And what else do we know? Well, we know it's from Midcool Farms in Dalcross. It's a high provenance, single estate organic barley. And we also know where the farm is from with the beer barley. Isla grown, Dunlosset estate, high provenance, single estate beer barley. Now, isn't that interesting? I wonder what the impetus was there. Was it Jim McEwen? No, it was Mark Renier. And now he's got full control of Waterford, and it's all about terroir. Now, Aaron, can you give me a zoom in here for a second? Mm-hmm. On the back of the bottle of every single Waterford whiskey, and feel free to write this down because I'm going to show the website here in a second, but if you want to actually have a snoop around, do write this number down.
Focusing like a total piece of shit, just a sec.
Yeah, no worries.
There we go.
My arm's not tired at all. This bottle's not heavy. It's fine.
Okay, give her.
Good?
Show us the thing, yeah.
There you go. I'm just going to give it another couple seconds so everybody has a chance to see it.
Is it the number you want?
Yeah, it's the number I want.
Number, okay.
It's this.
Yeah. Just a sec. Can you just hold it for another 15 seconds?
Yeah, I'll hold it for as long as you want, Aaron. Long as you want.
Okay, we're good.
We're good? All right, good. So why did I spend so much time focusing on that? Because if you go to Waterford's site and you type that in, thank you, Aaron. Do you want to just hop me over to that?
There you go.
You get this. I'm gonna have to click in. There we go. So this is the whiskey that's in your glasses. It's the organic Gaia 1.2. So what does the website tell you? It tells you who the farmers were. If you go to a map, there's all of the different farm locations for where it was grown, and there's the distillery. It tells you it was harvested in summer 2015, when it was distilled, how long it was matured to the day. It was originally for the Swedish market, but ended up in Canada as well. There are 4,000 bottles for the world. But oh no, we don't just stop there. You get a big talk about how it's the first organic whiskey in Ireland. They talk about, like, you can play the sound of what the actual one of the farms sounds like, which is stupid. I didn't play the file.
Rules.
You think that rules? I'm
Yes.
not gonna. So you get pictures of all the farms.
Whiskey ASMR.
And then here we go. Barley timelines. When it went to the maltings, when it was at the distillery, when it was fermented, when it was distilled, when it went to the warehouse, when it went to bottling. You have all these dates. You have the names of everyone involved in the distilling process. And then you want to talk about the terroir. Okay, well, here's a farm. Like, here are the farms. And if you want to zoom right the heck in, your computer's running like a slug there, Aaron. There's one of the listed names. There's Lac Organic Farms. It's right there. And you can zoom right in and find all the places where this whiskey is actually sourcing their barley from. They talk about the variety, the type of yeast, what different types of soils it's grown on. And this is available for every single whiskey they make. You get a giant fact sheet like this. You get a tasting note from the head distiller. And then, I think this is the coolest part, you actually can see what all of the different barrels were, where they came from. So this was actually made at Chateau Lafitte's in-house cooperage. These are owned by Seagrams, so this is either bourbon or Canadian whiskey. Speyside cooperage, so that was from Scotland. This is like Francois cooperage, based in France. There's a sherry butt that was originally filled with Vin Doux Naturel, and then they give you the breakdown of what the aging is. And that's for everything they make. Every last whiskey they make gets this breakdown, and I love that so much. I think you've heard me complain as just a going refrain about, the winery's website doesn't give me anything. I couldn't get a tech sheet for this. I couldn't get any information. I can get way too much information, and it's fantastic. So let's talk about what's in our glasses. We know it's a 3-year-old whiskey. We know it's coming from about 6 farms in Ireland. We know it's 100% organic. We know the barley strain. We know it was bloody aged in. And now we get the best Irish whiskey I've ever had in my life. It's not particularly close. This just rules. You want to call this the Bruichladdich of Ireland in the sense that Bruichladdich changed the entire game in the early 2000s for Scotland? I still think the blue bottles are stupid. Everything else with this, absolutely shockingly good. I love this. I get the nuts. I get the fruit. I get florals. I get spice. I almost get something kind of earthy, funky on this. Not in the same way the Japanese did, but I do get like an earthy, funky thing. You're picking up dates. I'm picking up olives, actually, as a saline note on this. Grassy, white chocolate, almonds. The white chocolate is really dominant on this. We actually talked about that when you were in the store earlier this week, Craig. Kevin likes the bottle. Kevin's wrong, but that's okay. We like Kevin. He's allowed to be wrong occasionally. Sean's getting iced tea. I don't, but I can kind of see why you would. It's got a lot of like delicate herbal notes. But yeah, I got really geeky about this because, we all say, well, when I'm talking to guests for doing this show, it's like, well, how geeky can I get? It's like, how geeky do you want to get? And, I often complain, hey, this brewery, hey, this winery, hey, this distillery, there's nothing on their website. I can't find a founding date. I can't find anything about the people who make it. I can't find anything about anything. These guys just give you everything on every bottle. We carry 3 of their different whiskeys, and every single one of them has a code like that on the back of the bottle. You want to know that about everything they've ever made? Just type it in on a website and you get this giant, like, 8-page fact sheet, everything about how the whiskey was made. And I love that.
That's totally cool.
Please give me more information. Please give me a weird audio file of what the farm sounds like. Please tell me every single date of when this was. And not only that, what if you were doing this as an in-house private bottling? What if you wanted to make your own barrel of whiskey? What if you wanted to order a cask? You'd get to know every single step, every single little daily thing that happened to your barrel when it was bottled. You'd know. And every single person you gave that bottle to or sold that bottle to, they would know every step. And I think that's incredible. I love that level of detail.
How much is this whiskey?
Like $106. Like, it's not, I mean, okay, it's expensive for an Irish whiskey.
Yeah.
It's expensive for a 3-year-old. But that's pretty spot on what most of this, like, all of these are within a few bucks of each other.
Sure.
Like, they're all between 100 and 120. Banana is a great note, and it's perfectly ripe banana. It's not green banana, it's not overripe, it's just right down the middle of yellow bananas. Yeah, there's getting barnyard grain feed. I think that might be the musty thing I'm picking up. Oh yeah, I totally get that. Yeah, it's like dry, clean cereal grain. Which, no surprise, when they're this obsessed with their barley, you can smell the barley, and I think that's brilliant. Sorry, I don't mean to be this much of a giant nerd. I think everybody's now going to know what my favorite whiskey of the night is. And I don't care. This is almost custom made for me. I mean, I've had whiskey custom made for me that I've liked less well than I like this. I love how much information they give you. I like that it's Mark Renier who, you know, literally pulled off that same stupid trick again. Like, after Bruichladdich, don't sell a distillery to Mark Renier. What are you doing? I just love everything about this program, and I think it's absolutely incredible. Cheddar cheese, too. Actually, the mustiness can turn a little bit cheesy, and it's a cheddar cheese, which is interesting. And then that salty character transits into something else. I'm going to say it's like a double Gloucester or Huntsman cheese. Like, I get the cheddar, and I get a little bit of blue cheese with this. And again, this is a three-year-old whiskey. It's not old, and I'm picking up bananas, and I'm picking up a little bit of an herbal note, and I'm picking up grass, and I'm picking up cheese, and I'm picking up a little bit of salt. I don't believe this is peated, but I do believe that their water source has to have a little bit of saline quality, like a saline quality to it, just to pull this much salt out of it. Craig's first in with comments, and he goes, Ireland, Canada, Scotland, Japan. John goes, Ireland, Scotland, Japan, and Canada, as does Marina. Oh, we have rankings right across the board here. Everybody is the Irish number one. Sandra hates them all. Well, you just can't please everyone.
Yeah, better get her a Pepsi.
But yeah, I thought this was a really cool tasting. I thought that showing 4 different countries, each taking their own stab at this, I don't know. When I look at the Burwood, I would say, wow, look at the potential Canada has. When I look at the Togouchi, it's like, it's not distilled in Japan. How do they get that Japanese character in it? It shouldn't taste Japanese. It should taste like Canada's Scottish. It should taste like Cape Breton Island. But in this case, because it's, I'm guessing, aged in Imoshochu casks, they get that sake character into the final product, and it has a Japanese flair to it. Glen Elgin's just good distilling. I wanted something difficult to compete with, because these are all $100 plus whiskeys. They needed to go against something in their own price point, and I respected these whiskeys enough. I wanted them to go against something really strong, and the fact that these whiskeys showed this well against the Glen Elgin is a massive compliment to single malt distilling outside of Scotland. Kevin has the Scotch first, the Irish second, the Canadian, and then the Japanese. Elizabeth 4312. Not a lot of fans of the Japanese. That's kind of interesting. It is the only blended mine, so that's fair. Sean thinks 3412, but it's tossed between 3 and 4. That's totally fair. I could make a case for either of these. I mean, I didn't. I just shamelessly homered onto this one. But, you know, it's also because these guys are really nice. And I got to meet, like I've talked about Mark Renier a little bit. I actually got to meet Mark Renier in 2008 when I spent a week at the Burwood Distillery. And, you know, I kind of showed up as this 25-year-old kid in his office. And he's like, who the hell are you? And why did we give you a free week at our distillery? And I was like, my name's Kyle. We sell a lot of Murray McDade and Burwood. And I'm here to like learn. And he was really nice about it. And like we talked, he took me very seriously. And like he asked about like what's selling and what isn't. And we talked about the market for the better part of, I'd say like an hour and a half. And he didn't treat me like a 25-year-old idiot who just rolled up because they sold a lot of Scotch. He took me very seriously, and I've never forgotten that. Mark Renier will always kind of be one of those people I have a lot of time for. And I actually didn't find out he was involved in the Waterford Distillery until earlier this week. We'd been carrying this whiskey for a while, and I didn't know. Yeah, I get a lot of time for Mark. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. This was a great deal of fun. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you, Aaron.
You're welcome.
This was Happy Father's Day, everyone. This was a lot of fun to put together. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you in 2 weeks for a wine tasting to be announced. Enjoy the rest of your Friday night. Good night.